From Diamond Light Source, this is the Diamond Podcast.
This month, we come to the end of 2012 and also of Diamond's 10-year anniversary. We join in the celebrations at the Synchrotron's anniversary event to hear the highlights of the past year and decade, as well as discover the UK Science Minister's perspective of the facility.
It's this extraordinary combination of both the most pure scientific discovery but also practical applications with organisations like GSK or Rolls-Royce using beamlines.
More from David Willits, Minister of State for Universities and Science, later in the programme, when we also hear how diamond is being used to understand the dangers of a toxic mud spill, to design methods of storing hydrogen fuel in the future, and engineering new tissues to avoid premature labour.
By combining collagen with the right types of cells, we've actually created an artificial amniotic membrane, which could in the future be used as a patch to repair ruptured membranes early in pregnancy.
More from Jay Connon later. I'm Mira Senthilingam, and this is the December edition of the Diamond Light Source podcast.
The Diamond Podcast. For more information, look us up online at diamond.ac.uk/podcast.
This year, we've been looking back at Diamond's various accomplishments over the past decade, as the facility celebrated its 10-year anniversary. The celebrations came to a head last month at the Royal Society in London, in a commemorative day highlighting the research, culture and outreach accomplished at the Synchrotron. Diamond CEO Gerd Matelik was there and filled me in on the day.
Well, we celebrated today our 10th anniversary, and that dates back to the signing of the joint venture agreement in 2002. And in the first 5 years, we built Diamond, brought it into operation after 5 years, and now for 5 years we are producing science and doing science. And I wanted to showcase this science which we have done to the public, and that was today. So we had 10 wonderful talks, just highlighting a small part of the total breadth of the research program at Diamond, but an important part.
And I mean, also today there was an unveiling of a very interesting protein structure, so the hand, foot and mouth virus.
Yes, I liked this example because that was recently done by a completely new way of determining structures at Diamond, and on that field Diamond is leading, really world leading, because you don't have to freeze the crystals anymore. You can do it at room temperature, very important, because virus crystals don't like to be frozen, they crack. And this is a collaboration between China and the UK, groups in Beijing and in Oxford. And the hand, foot and mouth virus is endemic originally in China, killing a lot of people, especially children, every year. And it has also reached across the Pacific now, the United States, California. And what the group did, this collaboration, is that they found this a mode on this virus, which is a kind of a breathing mode. And that's the way this virus infects our cells. And we see where the infecting RNA is coming out of the virus. We see the hole, right?
So they were able to see this at Diamond.
They were able to see that, and in these two structures. And that means now they can go back and design a drug to close that area where the hole would be developing. It's just wonderful. I like this as an example of excellent, outstanding science done with Diamond Light Source.
Hence why you've had this structure built to celebrate that.
Absolutely, because, you know, it's a glass sculpture trying to bring out the major properties of this virus. Of course, magnified many, many times.
Now, today is celebrating 10 years of Diamond, but it is also now coming towards the end of just this year, so 2012. And what would you say have been your kind of highlights of this year at Diamond?
Oh, there are many, again, across the whole spectrum. We heard a lot of the highlights today in the talks. Before, I think the life science part has made a big impact overall. In total, we have done something like 1,000 different structures now. But also the first talk emphasized what the new fields we are looking at now, cloud control of electrons. That means looking really into correlation of electrons when they get together in order to form superconductivity or different results. So how can we develop quantum computers and all this type of things? And it's all that the electrons behave if you bring them together, millions of them, of course, millions of millions, in a different way, like a crowd of human beings being put together. And they behave in new ways, in different ways, and we have to learn how to produce material, tailor-made material, for specific properties, like superconductivities, like fast storage memory, small storage memory, and so on. That's wonderful, and also that finally our engineering beamlines came live. It was a great moment, because now we can look into material properties.
So an ever-increasing range of research being conducted at the Synchrotron. That was Diamond CEO Gerd Matelik. One scientist presenting his work on the day was Sandy Blake from the University of Nottingham, whose research could pave the way for hydrogen gas becoming our future fuel source.
Well, we look at metal organic frameworks, which are commonly known as MOFs, because they're very interesting materials for gas storage. They contain metals and they contain organic linkers, and when you put them together in the right way, you get metal organic frameworks. And a lot of these frameworks are porous, and so we can store things in them.
I think one of the main aims is to store things like hydrogen, so for hydrogen in the fuel cells in the future.
Exactly. And one of our main aims has been to efficiently and reversibly store hydrogen inside these MOFs so that it can be used as for what they call mobile applications, which is nothing to do with telephony, but it is to do with cars.
What are the main kind of challenges in this area at the moment?
The main challenges are really to get MOFs that can hold enough hydrogen to give your hydrogen-powered car a good range, and also to be able to get that hydrogen in, keep it in until you want it, and then get it out.
And I guess, how does this all fit into other modes of perhaps hydrogen storage? Is this perhaps one of the main kind of players in that area?
Well, from my point of view, it's very important. It's a front runner, but there are other techniques such as metal hydrides, which are aiming to do the same sort of thing. One of the beauty of MOFs is that the metals actually make up a fairly small minority of the number of atoms in the structure. So by having one heavy atom, you don't actually end up with a very dense, heavy material.
So could you go into examples, say, of one particular metal organic framework, so what it's made up of and how it would work?
One of the frameworks that we were working on was based on indium, and the idea here was that we would actually make the MOF. We make it with a template, and that template actually turned out to be a very good plug for the end of the pour. So it actually restricted the hydrogen coming in and out. So in principle, what you could do is you could fill up the pour with hydrogen, turn the gate, and you'd close the gate. When you wanted the hydrogen to come out again, you'd turn the gate back the other way, the hydrogen would come out. That's the principle. It's not a working device yet. But what we have done is we've got a proof of concept that you can actually gate these pores and control them.
And I guess, you're working on very kind of small scales here. So how does Diamond kind of come in to help you visualise and really research this?
The reason for using Diamond at first was that we actually grew very small crystals. MOFs typically grow to crystals of a few tens of microns. If you're very lucky, 100 microns. And so they're actually not very good crystals. So we actually use the power of Diamond to offset the poor crystal quality and the small crystal size.
And so what have you really been able to see most recently? Because you've been working in this area for quite some time. So what perhaps have been the most recent development?
Well, the Nottingham Group have been in this area for a considerable time. And one of the more recent ones is that gated pour. We've also moved into not only the storage of hydrogen, but also into carbon capture. What we'd like to do is actually have a system where you almost pinch the CO2 and hold it in the pores for long enough until you want to release it, and then you gently release it.
And where would you want to release it?
That's a question. Because what you then do with the CO2 is really beyond the scope of our project. Because what they currently do with CO2 is they would like to store it underground. Now, that's an intermediate technology. It's not a permanent solution, but it will actually give probably several decades of breathing space to develop new technologies. What people would like to do, of course, and there are UK scientists who are working on this already, is actually somehow use that CO2 in some useful way. use it as some kind of feedstock.
And I guess almost just any concluding points then on what your real kind of hopes are for perhaps the next year or so.
We would hope to elaborate on what we've done already. We would hope to find new systems. And this is the advantage of working with a diamond, because on every visit we find something new. And very often that tells us we're working in the right direction. Equally well, it can tell us things we're not expecting. We look to diamond to accelerate the progress of our research projects, but sometimes it redirects the effort. Sometimes we find things at diamond that we weren't suspecting.
Sandy Blake from the University of Nottingham. Now, as well as green energy, scientists at Diamond are also working to make our environment greener and less toxic, as environmental geochemist Ian Burke from the University of Leeds explains.
I specialise in understanding contaminated environments, looking at the speciation and behaviour of a range of trace metals and radionuclides, looking towards remediation and cleanup.
Now, an interesting kind of case you worked on recently was the Hungarian mud spill of 2010. Yes,
in the 4th of October 2010, there was a catastrophic failure of the containment dam at the ICA repository for red mud, which is the byproduct of processing of bauxite ore for aluminium processing. This released about 1 million cubic metres of the red mud material into the environment. Because of the chemicals used in the processing of bauxite ore, the red mud residue is very highly caustic. It has a pH of nearly 13, and certain trace elements which are potentially toxic are concentrated into the red mud, and this has been spread down the valley in a flood event which distributed the red mud in the environment, and therefore led to a lot of concern about the long-term behaviour of this material in the environment.
And what were really the main concerns? So if it, say, were left there for a long period of time, what effects perhaps was it thought it could have on, say, the health of local people and so on?
So the material itself is a very fine-grained dust material, and it's easily wind-blown. It has a pH of 13 due to sodium hydroxide, and that in itself is very harmful. Sodium hydroxide itself can cause caustic burns and especially damage to the eyes. It also has a high salinity, a lot of salt associated with the red mud. In an agricultural environment, that salt damage to plants might have been a problem when trying to grow crops in land that's affected by red mud. It also contains high concentrations of a range of potentially toxic elements like chromium, arsenic and vanadium, which might leach from the red mud into watercourses, be taken up by plants and enter the food chain, therefore rendering the agricultural land a hazard and not useful for growing of food crops for human consumption. So that led to a range of research issues around treatment and clean-up of the land that was affected by red mud.
So it's quite a range of concerns and issues. What did you really do to help, I guess, look into the situation and see the risks?
Well, I was able to think about the speciation of a few of the key metal contaminants in the red mud. Using the Synchrotron source at Diamond, I was able to combine that with electron microscopy and chemical leaching tests to determine the chemical speciation of chromium, arsenic and vanadium within the red mud. And having determined that chemical speciation and likely environmental behaviour, I was able to predict whether those elements would be an environmental problem and provide a first approximation of some of the environmental impacts of the red mud spill. For example, chromium in the red mud is associated with iron oxide particles and is not very available or toxic. But the arsenic and the vanadium in the red mud is associated with surface complexes which are potentially bioavailable, and therefore that would be an environmental hazard, and that justifies some of the decisions of the Hungarian government to remove the red mud and treat the land rather than trying to clean up by leaving the red mud in situ.
So you were able to kind of probe down into these samples and just see, say, the various levels of these kind of toxic chemicals to see what would be the risks?
It was much more than the levels, as in basic concentrations. So there's a massive difference between knowing the distribution and concentration, and knowing whether that will be a problem. So that's why using the synchrotron methods at Diamond, I was able to find out what the chemical form of those elements within the red mud actually was, and use that data to predict the mobility, and that in conjunction with knowing the levels, the concentrations within the environment, that could be used together to predict the overall risk from the red mud spill.
And what about now then? So that was a couple of years ago now. What are kind of your main objectives at the moment, research-wise?
In terms of the red mud spill in Hungary, we're really interested in what are the biogeochemical methods that might lead to trace element release from red mud that was left in the environment. Because there was small areas where red mud was applied into soils or where it was left into wetland environments, and looking whether the microbial process can lead to release of elements like arsenic into solution, and whether there is areas that are still of potential concern.
Ian Burke from the University of Leeds.
Did you know that Diamond's floor-level monitor system shows Diamond tilting twice a day due to the moon passing overhead?
You're listening to the Diamond Light Source podcast, and this month we're looking back over 2012 to discover some of the scientific highlights that took place at the Synchrotron. Still to come, we hear how stem cells are being used to engineer new tissues in the lab to relieve a range of conditions, including premature labour. But before that, 2012 saw Diamond celebrate its 10-year anniversary, which came to an end in a large event at the Royal Society last month, where the research and accomplishments of the facility were showcased for all to see, including the eyes of the Minister of State for Universities and Science, David Willetts.
Well, one of the great strengths of British science is that we have such a range of disciplines where we are world class. And that's actually where Diamond Light Source fits in, because the synchrotron is used by such a wide range of disciplines, from the life sciences through to crystallography. And it is extraordinary the number of different researchers in different disciplines who've used it. And whenever you look at any assessment of British science, it's the sheer breadth that really is so impressive.
And I guess, would you say, because you played a role in, say, the funding for the next phase of Diamond, and is it because of this kind of diversity and wide role, or what do you like about Diamond?
Well, the reasons why we were absolutely clear about the case for the extra 10 beam lines were, first, the excellence of what Diamond was already doing. Secondly, it's this extraordinary combination of both the most pure scientific discovery, but also practical applications with organisations like GSK or Rolls-Royce using beam lines. And then, as well as that, the confidence that the project had been so well run and so well managed, delivered on time and on budget, that for the Treasury they could be confident that, by and large, this wouldn't be one of those capital projects that span out of control. Put all that together, and we had a very strong case, and I'm pleased we were able to persuade the Treasury of that case.
And you've touched on an interesting fact that 10% of the beamlines at Diamond are open for use by industries like Rolls-Royce. And would you say it's quite important for our industrial future as well and our economy?
Absolutely, and it's never going to be cost effective for an individual company to have its own synchrotron, and to be able to access the world's best synchrotron is a great advantage. And so this combination of science and also commercial application is one of the many reasons why we really do see it as a great national success.
Minister of State for Universities and Science, David Willetts. Now, that's almost it for this month's podcast, but before we go, one last piece of extraordinary research taking place at Diamond: the engineering of new bodily tissues in the lab. And doing this is the University of Reading's Che Connon.
I'm interested in tissue engineering, so that's the recreation of tissues using synthetic or biological scaffolds with stem cells incorporated into them to recreate natural tissues for two purposes. One is to create a tissue that you could then transplant to repair damaged tissue, be it cornea or be it the amniotic membrane. And the other purpose is to understand the biology of the tissue itself. So once you have a model a tissue engineered model, then it gives you the power to investigate the way the cells behave and the mechanisms underlying the structure or repair of that tissue.
So I guess just focusing in on the amniotic membrane in particular, can we go to the beginning of that? And so what's really involved to, I guess, even contemplate trying to engineer that, and what do you need and what would you look into?
So premature rupture of the amniotic membrane causes premature birth, and at the moment there's a recent report suggesting that it's the second biggest killer of children under age of 5, premature birth, that is. So I was interested in what causes the premature birth and focusing in on the amniotic membrane, which is this tissue that surrounds the developing fetus, and ruptures prior to birth naturally, but occasionally it ruptures prematurely, causing early birth. So I was interested in what it was about this material, why it was breaking up early. So I used the synchrotron to investigate the arrangement of the constituent molecules, which are collagen, and investigate the alignment of the collagen fibres, and relate that then to a weakening of the tissue.
So would you really take samples then of the membrane, say from pregnant women or recently kind of women that have recently given birth, and look at it?
Yeah, so we've investigated membranes taken from healthy amniotic membrane and diseased amniotic membrane, and investigated the differences in structure between the two. We've also taken these tissues, deconstructed them, and then put them back together again to understand the biology.
And so what beamlines at Diamond are you using to look at this, and what have you been looking at?
We've been using I-22 to investigate the collagen spacing and fibril alignment using the I-22.
And so is this alignment something that differs or kind of weakens, say, when someone has had given birth prematurely, and is this therefore something you would look out for?
So what we found was the alignment of the collagen fibres is increased nearer the rupture site. So the areas which are prone to breaking, which is a part of normal birth, the collagen fibres become more aligned at that point. And we believe that this increased alignment of the collagen fibres is actually facilitating the rupture of the membrane.
So how much of this, say, is this quite new insight? Was this not really known before, or was, say, the role of collagen in this way known?
Unfortunately, there's not enough research actually in premature birth, and the arrangement of collagen was not previously known within the amniotic membrane. The process of rupturing is still very much poorly investigated.
This is quite a good understanding, I guess, of the biology of that membrane in general. But are there perhaps any applications, say, for women that are at risk of, say, premature birth? But I'm just trying to think, how would you try and see the structure of their membrane?
Yeah. Well, what we have done is by analysing the structure of the membrane using the synchrotron X-ray diffraction, we can appreciate the complexity of the system, and then we've actually recreated that using a tissue engineering approach. And by combining collagen with the right types of cells, we've actually created an artificial amniotic membrane, which could in the future be used as a patch to repair ruptured membranes early in pregnancy.
So to prevent those women giving birth too early?
Correct, yes, that's right.
Is this something that we might be close to, say, perhaps not immediately for the amniotic membrane, but given, say, advances in this field in general, is this something that could be a reality soon?
Well, certainly we have proof of principle that we can create the tissue and that the tissue is functional. The next step is clinical study using the membrane and seeing if it actually does benefit the patients.
Jay Connon from the University of Reading. Now that is it for this month and for this year. But do join us again in 2013 for more scientific news and research from the Synchrotron. In the meantime, if you have any questions about Diamond or the research taking place there, the email address is podcast@diamond.ac.uk. You can listen to previous editions of this programme online at diamond.ac.uk/podcast or nakedscientists.com/diamond. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Thank you this month to Gerd Matalik, Sandy Blake, Ian Burke, David Willits and Che Connon. I'm Mira Senthilingam. Have a happy festive season, and until next year, goodbye.
The Diamond Podcast is brought to you by Diamond Light Source and produced by thenakedscientists.com. There's more information on our website at diamond.ac.uk/podcast.